Hi guys. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Barry Cranford. I'm one of the organisers of the London CTOs. So I'm not a CTO myself. I am in fact a recruiter. So I always wince when I have to say that on one of these groups. But I run a recruitment company called RecWorks, and we've been in the tech community space for over 12 years now. So the reason we're involved, the reason we stay involved, my passion in the whole thing really is around mentoring. Or at least we've sort of been trying to find a way to use recruitment to be a power of good in the industry. So we try and use our network as much as we can to put people together that have experience with people that are either facing these challenges or struggling with something. And that's really what today's all about. Is a lot of people have been thrust into this position of having to hire remotely, having to onboard people they've already hired and have never done it before. And we've brought a few people together that have had this experience. So yeah, hopefully a chance for you to learn from all of those. So with no further ado, then I'll hand over to Martin just to say a few words about your background in the space.
Oh, hi. Yeah, so I've been hiring remotely for about 20 years now, I think. I've probably conducted over the years, probably close to 1,000 interviews at least, I would say. I've hired probably about 400 or 500 people in my career over my time. Luckily, most of my hiring now is dealt with by my managers, thank goodness. But yeah, hopefully I've got some battle stories to tell you along the way. Over to you, James.
I've been hiring remotely for probably about 5 years now, but I've been hiring for a lot longer than that. I've probably done in the region of 50 to 100 interviews, and out of that, we've had about 15 to 20 hires. And like Martin, I've probably got a few battle stories and tips that I can share from my experiences. John, what about you?
Yeah, so I've been running a remote first consultancy for the last 11 years now, and so our hiring has been a combination of remote and on site, with the majority of that process taking place remote. I don't know about numbers, to be honest. I've probably done sort of initial phone screens on something like 300 or 400 people total over that time, and probably hired about 15 to 20 of them at the other end of that.
Got you. Okay. So yeah, thanks for that. Can I just see by a show of thumbs, how many people have more of an interest in remote hiring rather than onboarding? So thumbs up for remote hiring. And thumbs up for remote onboarding.
Slightly more hiring.
Okay. All right, so I'll start. The video is a bit flaky, but I'm going to start with talking about the remote onboarding questions. Okay, so we had a lovely, honest bit of feedback when we asked for questions for this one, and it was I know how not to onboard people, as it was a bit of a disaster for me. So I'm really looking forward to see how other people have done it successfully. So with that in mind, can I just have a few words from some of the panel just to kind of reassure people that you have done it, it did work, it is okay, and just talk through your experiences with this.
Cool. John, do you want to go first?
Sure, why not? So I think the thing that's important about remote working in general is that you are giving people the opportunity to work together as though they were in the same place, co-located, right? And so if your onboarding story, I'm assuming that most people have dialed in because they are primarily sort of co-located businesses who are now suddenly thrust into a world where they're not going to get to be. I think the question to ask yourself is like, what are the things that are important during an onboarding process in a co-located fashion, and how do I replicate that? So for us, it's about we always allocate somebody a buddy, regardless of whether they are going to be onboarded on premises or remote, and that buddy sort of takes them through kind of getting their dev environments and everything set up, make sure that they're comfortable, they know where all the SaaS systems are, that they can log into everything, that they know where to get help, that they know what our Slack etiquette is, and all those kind of bits and pieces, and then typically spends the week together with them, pairing on something, or just sort of being available during that sort of initial learning exercise. Buddying up remotely, designating an individual to basically remote pair with somebody is a perfectly reasonable and healthy way of onboarding somebody. And I think that the main thing is to agree a routine. So make sure that you are agreeing that you'll check in first thing in the morning, like whatever first thing means for that pair, and to figure out what the rest of the day looks like from there, and make sure that that the buddy is available, doesn't have other responsibilities, or doesn't have like highly synchronous other responsibilities that will take them away from that pairing, but to basically spend the more or less the entire week working together in some fashion. In some cases, like on an all day Zoom call, in some cases more kind of checking in periodically, but just generally being available. But it does work, and it's I would say it's a bit less straightforward than a co-located onboarding, but really that's just the sort of coordination of communication rather than anything else.
Cool. James?
Yeah, I mean, obviously everything Jon has said we work with as well. I've been working with an entirely remote company for the past 3 years. So in some cases, I haven't met my employees until sort of 6 or 12 months into their employment. So I can reassure you that the hiring process does work remotely, and the onboarding process does as well if you do it right. I think in addition to the buddy scheme, one thing that we found useful is setting up meetings, not just with people in the same team, such as the engineering team, but also across the wider company, so that people feel connected to the business as a whole, not just the team that they've joined. And it helps build that sort of sense of overall company culture and values that you want to promote.
Cool. So we didn't say who we all work for. So I actually work for Microsoft. I run Java at Microsoft. So my division is across all the different time zones. We have the luxury at Microsoft that we have, all of this kind of heavyweight resource in place for onboarding people. So some of the things that happen is that a person who is remotely remote will actually go through an entire week of onboarding at Microsoft. There's a whole bunch of online training courses that they'll take. They go through an entire day of onboarding with human resources over Microsoft Teams calls as opposed to Zoom. And when they then come into our group for the first time, they get assigned a line manager. They get assigned a buddy who is a peer of theirs, and they get similar to James. They get assigned a mentor who is external to our group. We of course have the onboarding doc that all folks should go through. There are two aspects of that. There's a culture section, and then there's a technical section. Technical section usually speaks for itself. The culture section is actually really, really important. It has things in there like booking in half-hour meetings, coffee meetings, virtual coffee meetings with every member in the group, so they socially get to meet everyone. It takes them through all of the cultural and communication norms that the team has. That's really critical. So folks understand when they should use Teams, when they should use email, what's expected of them before they do a code review, all those kind of things which can cause clashes between engineers in particular. And then we tend to spend an awful lot of time, we have a randomized coffee club every week. So that new person will be in a half-hour conversation with 3 new people every week in the group. And there's also a virtual lounge that people can hang out with. So our onboarding focuses probably more on the people than the technology aspect. The technology aspect kind of usually takes care of itself with the sort of peer programming model that Jon, I think, mentioned. And yes, it's a lot of work to do this, right? A lot of work, but it's absolutely worth it. It's about making the person come in, feel comfortable and loved, a big virtual hug, if you will, when they come on board. That's the trick to it.
I mean, I would argue that onboarding someone remotely isn't more work than doing a good onboarding process in person. Like, I think the communication overhead's a bit higher, but the amount of effort you put in is likely to be as high if you're doing that good a job, regardless of whether you've got people in the same building or not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the main sort of adaptation is just the channels of communication and the fact that we are all using the appropriate technologies and headphones and things, so that things are, because occasionally people have accents, and you want to make sure that everyone is coming across clearly. And in order to do that, you need the best kit, and that does mean headphones, not microphone on your laptop, and it does mean that occasionally you might need to turn your webcam on and actually show your face to everyone that you're working with, because a voice at the end of a blank screen just doesn't cut it sometimes. And it's about being adaptive, because sometimes using Slack or whatever text tool is appropriate, but sometimes you need to turn the webcam on, and it's finding that balance. I think it's as much work for the person being onboarded to find that balance as it is for the people onboarding them. It's very much a two-way street.
Probably add two more quick things as well. The thing that I love about Silicon Valley startups and Shoreditch startups, the cool hipster ones that I'm involved with as an advisor, they send little welcome packs out, right? They take a lot of care about writing a handcrafted letter, a bag of cookies, the branded T-shirt, and all that sort of stuff. It's amazing how that gesture actually is really impactful to people. And I completely forgot my other point, so let's carry on with the next question.
Well, I guess the sort of welcome pack thing, if as and when we return to a world where we do have people working in a building together as well as maybe remote, because we balance those two things, it's important to make sure that anything that you're doing for people that you would onboard in person, you're doing equivalently for someone that you're onboarding remotely. So there's no imbalance of sort of importance suggested by that. So we have branded hoodies and T-shirts and stuff, and for a remote onboarding person, we'll send that to their house rather than having them pick them up in the office. Although typically our MO is to have every couple of months bring everybody together in one place. Anyway, we won't be doing that for a little while.
Well, there's one other question I was going to ask the group. You can do a show of hands. Who here has a single portal page or index into their knowledge base? 1, 2. Okay, maybe about a quarter of you. So for the rest of you, you now know what you need to go and do for your onboarding, right? It is the worst thing in the world for a new person to arrive and sit there for 3 months going, where is this piece of info? Where do I look for that? It's just horrifically bad. And I'm going to hold my hand up. My new group is completely guilty of this at the moment. We had 3 new people start 2 weeks ago, and they are still utterly lost. And that's partly SharePoint's fault, but hey.
Do you have any recommendations for which platform to use for that?
Well, if you want to help my share price, I can highly recommend Office 365 and the accompanying stuff that goes along with it. But I think a lot of folks use Google.
Yeah, I think it's less about what tool you choose and more about how you wield it. Like you can provide really comprehensive, well-indexed documentation as a set of flat text files, and equally you can create an absolute fucking mess in a wiki or in Confluence or in SharePoint. So really, it's more about structure than tools. I think as technologists, we get very hung up on like, what tool should I use for this? Actually, it doesn't fucking matter. Just do the job.
Yeah, I will have a slight argument almost against SharePoint. I shouldn't say this, and against Confluence, and that they're really pretty darn heavyweight. They're really designed for the business folks to put in heavy sets of documentation and information. They're not that well geared for engineers, in my personal opinion.
I've certainly had a good experience with onboarding documents being stored in some Git repository or some other version repository, and part of the onboarding process is that as you go through it, if you find any steps that are missing or need updating, you do that and push it back into that repository as part of your onboarding process, so that it becomes a living and up-to-date document that everyone can use, not just for onboarding, but for, like Martin says, as a single point of entry for knowledge sharing.
Yeah, we use... Yeah, absolutely. We use Git for managing our docs. We publish them into a static S3 bucket that has some Google Auth stuff around it, so it can be accessed by team members who are not sort of tech savvy, but can be updated by anybody, and that provides a nice search index and that kind of thing. But really, it's flat, it's markdown text files essentially. There's nothing really magical to it.
I'm admiring the person who's got a pandemic icon as their Stefano. That's gold.
Okay, so thanks very much for that, then, guys. I'll move on to the next question that we've got here that we've had in. We actually had a few people talk about this, and it was around whether probation periods and how they're handled should be changed, and how evaluating progress during probation periods needs to be something that is done differently. Any advice for people in that situation?
I don't think it matters. Like, I don't think this is different whether you're on premise or otherwise. Like, I think your probation period is likely to be something like 3 months with a possible option to extend it. I think you always need to be clear about what you're expecting from someone in order for them to pass that probation. I don't think where somebody works is really any different to that. It might be that your career ladder or whatever you're measuring people against contains some stuff about capable of communicating well online, and signaling their availability, and collaborating remotely. But I don't think anything much would change about the mechanics of probation.
Completely agree. So I'll ask the other question: who here has a proper career ladder all written out for their company so that engineers know how to go through the ranks? Okay, so for those of you who don't, you know what else you need to go and do, right? So because when you get, especially when you get into this remote hiring situation, it becomes a process, right? A lot of in-person hiring, people still rightly or wrongly do it on a gut feel. Is it a good in-person interview? Do I feel like I'm going to get on with that person? You have to be far more systematic about it when you do it remotely. And so measuring that person against a set of rules that everyone has to follow and meet is critical. It also helps avoid lawsuits. Which, as your companies all grow, for those of you who've got smaller companies, will happen in your careers if it hasn't happened to you already. So head that one off at the pass early.
Yeah, I think explicit communication of everything needs to get better in a remote first sense, and so your career ladder needs to be explicit, because no one is really seeing you model what you want from people in quite as much detail as they would if they were sat in the same room as you. So, like, asking specifically for particular behaviours, it becomes a really important thing for that to be an ongoing conversation, as well as it probably should be in an on-premises world as well.
And there's really good free career ladders out there that you can borrow and steal from, right? And I think Monzo's got a great one, for example, that's public, and there's a few others out there as well.
Yeah,
so
it'll take you
a lot of work.
Take you about 6 months to put it together, sort of on and off. I think 6 months to a year, and evolving over time as well. It's quite a lot of stuff to do.
Yeah, it certainly helps, especially I think, as a engineering manager or as a CTO, when you're talking to the rest of the business, to have a clearly defined matrix of engineering competencies that you can turn around and say, well, this is how my staff are distributed in terms of their competency and their skills, and this is how I'd like to improve them. And I think that is an important thing. And like both of you said, having really clear expectations laid out is super important when you're doing the remote onboarding, I think.
Agree.
Okay, great. Does anyone else have any other questions on remote onboarding before we move on to remote hiring that they'd like to bring up?
Just wanted to ask whether people had a view on what size company you need to start developing the sort of career progression ladders. Obviously, you probably don't need it from day one, but is there a sensible tipping point when you go beyond sort of, okay, we know this person is senior, we know this person is junior, that sort of more touchy-feely approach?
As soon as you have your first squad, if you're going to use Spotify's model, so as soon as you got your first 5 or 6 people, and you need to delineate, a senior or a team lead from the rest, you've got to put it in place right there and then.
Yeah, I've come across it happening earlier when even as a startup, when you're about 10, 15 people, and you've only got maybe 2 engineers and a couple of contractors, then when it comes around for bonus time, you need some way of comparing people across the whole company, and that's when sort of competency matrices can come into play as well. And although they might be less engineering focused and more general at that stage.
I think we kicked off our process of putting career ladder together, partly on that sort of basis of, like, we changed the structure so that there were individuals who were being kind of designated as a kind of lead position, and so we need to define what that looked like. In part, it was because we became a sort of a more serious business in terms of how we thought about remuneration and how we thought about kind of supporting careers for our team. So it sort of helped to align remuneration so we can get away from the sort of early, very bootstrap position of, like, let's pay you what we can get away with, as opposed to let's pay you something fair relative to your peers. You need some way of measuring that, and the career ladder is a really good way of doing that. And in part, it's about alignment. It's about sort of making sure that your team are pulling in the same direction. We're a AWS and DevOps consultancy. One of the ways that we pick up work is to go and present at conferences or participate in panels like this, and so I've got a career ladder sort of vertical around reputation building. And by putting that in, I can say, hey guys, I need some more people to go out and work on these bits, because it's important to me for you to go and put yourself out there, because that's the sort of thing that drives our business.
I think it's horrible and trite, but it comes down to that. If you want to improve something, you need a way of measuring it, and that comes down to, in some cases, just even a simple 1 to 10 rating on a matrix somewhere, rather than anything more elaborate than that. But it's a start, and it allows you to start measuring things and improving on them, and whether it's, like you say, reputational work, or whether it's an engineering competency such as test-driven development.
I'm going to go a little bit meta here, but it's one of those interesting things when you're, especially in your early stage startup CTO, or you're a CTO of a very small company. So when I'm advising a lot of businesses, we see a lot of co-founders effectively get fired by boards, right? When they go through the next stage of growth. And that's usually because the CTO or the CEO has not strategically thought about the next level of things they need to do in order for the company to grow smoothly and not have major road bumps along the way. Having things like the career path plan for the company set up early before you hit that growth stage is one of those critical things that investors and stuff will be looking for in you as a CTO. So for those of you who are newer at being a CTO or are in that smaller stage, that and a whole bunch of other stuff, which I won't go into now, is kind of the sort of things they will expect you to be thinking about, putting your CTO hat on as opposed to just your tech lead hat on. It's a hard lesson to learn. I've seen, unfortunately, a lot of good people lose their positions in startups because they haven't put that thinking in early enough.
Thanks.
Okay, great. All right. So with that, then I think we'll shift over to the other side of this call, which is around the remote hiring. Now, similarly to the onboarding, obviously there's a lot of people out there that still have pressure to hire, and for a lot of people that just started moving their teams that they already know on board. So obviously a lot more daunting, the idea of hiring people that you will not meet before they work for you. So for the panel then, for anyone that's just going through this, or that's just about to go into this stage, what challenges are they about to come across? What are the unknowns for them that they don't yet know about? What kind of pitfalls and how can they be avoided?
I mean, my main bit of advice from here, I think, is to bear in mind that how you hired previously, before we were all stuck in our homes, will not be how you hire now, right? You should definitely be critical of your existing processes and approaches, because they won't necessarily, they're not serving the same outcome now. So I think one of the things that's really important about a hiring process and an interview process in particular is that you are able to measure in some fashion how that candidate is going to perform in the real life work environment that you have set up for. And so if your business pairs a lot, does pair programming, then you should probably be doing a pairing exercise as part of your hiring. If you are, as I say, we're consultancy. We do a lot of whiteboard kind of communication. That's part of my hiring process is to sort of check how people can communicate themselves in a kind of whiteboarding architectural perspective. So have a look at how you have hired before and figure out what was that process, what was the outcome of that particular part of my hiring process, and does that outcome actually match where we're going to now, and if not, how do I change that part of the process to better match the new reality.
James?
Yeah, I think one thing that I've definitely found is that aside from doing the real-time activities such as shared whiteboarding with some type of Google document or something like that, or pair programming, it is not necessarily easy to determine someone's technical level simply from the 2 to 4 hours that you spend interviewing them remotely. And sometimes it's better to spend that time trying to evaluate them as a person, because you're going to be spending time talking to these people remotely, and you have to be able to get on with them. You know, that barrier to communication is that little bit more when you're remote. It's not like you're just sat next to someone in an office and you have no choice but to talk to them. You have a tendency to talk to people that you want to talk to when you're working remotely. So getting on with people is I think, pretty key. And judging the technical ability is something that you can certainly do within the sort of the probationary period that follows when they actually join your company. And it's part of what the probationary period should be used for. It shouldn't necessarily be used for a period where you can quickly fire someone just because it's convenient. You know, it should be for a valid reason.
Cool. The biggest change that you're all going to find is that when humans communicate, it's about 75% body language. It's weird stuff like pheromones and smells and the context, the environs you're around. It's really strange stuff. There's a whole bunch of psychology papers you can read up on it. I won't bore you to death with the details, but that's now thrown out the window, right? So that 30-second gut feeling you have when someone walks in a room, you're like, I'm going to like this person or not. You don't have that opportunity anymore. And that's both a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing in a way because it means that your hiring is more regimented, right? You're not judging people on their looks, their gender, their character, necessarily what shirt they're wearing today. Those little instinctive things that us humans do. But what it does do is it makes remote interviewing take a lot longer to get the same results, if that makes sense. So we found that we now have a series of shorter chats because we don't want to exhaust the person on the other end. It's also very mentally and emotionally challenging to be on a call like this and be at your best. So we have a series of technical calls with the person. We also have a series of just social calls as such. We just have, again, one of these kind of virtual coffee club things where we just have a chat about their day-to-day existence, their life, their hobbies, their interests, all that sort of stuff. And we don't blend the two. We actually deliberately keep those two as separate conversations. One of the other challenges I've found as well is the whiteboarding type exercises. I see Davey and others have put in some decent tools there, some ideas. It still takes a lot longer, right? Because you can't instantly go, oh, I meant to draw the arrow here, or point out, oh, what do you mean over here? You really have to remember it's a delayed asynchronous communication mechanism when we're on video. And so just, you need to think to yourself, it's like I'm communicating with an astronaut in the space station or up in the moon, right? You've got to give the other person a lot more time and a lot more space to respond to a question or to change their diagram. One of the things we found which works pretty well is if you actually do the drawing on your side and you have them direct you. That's a really interesting technique to see how well they can verbally communicate their ideas across to you, and you do the drawing and they can just say, oh no, I didn't mean that, cross that out, draw an arrow to the left, that sort of thing. So I found that to be quite useful. As for the rest, it should be you should be following hopefully the same processes. If you do pair programming, do some pair programming over a video call. If you do a code test, should be able to do the code test over the call and that sort of thing. So that side of it shouldn't change. It's just the social stuff which changes.
I guess in the immediate future, we need to be taking into account that pretty much everybody is distracted as hell and not operating at their best, and have additional responsibilities around them that they were not necessarily expected to have, and so probably taking that into account into your hiring process is probably worthwhile as well. I'm not quite sure. Maybe this is about allowing people a little longer to complete the sort of remote assessments that you might be doing, or being somewhat more lenient if they are you're in an interview and they've got kids running around, that sort of thing, where that might ordinarily, like in the past, that would have been a red flag about boundary keeping, whereas now we're in uncharted waters, so everything's a bit fucking weird.
Yeah.
One thing I'd throw out there at this point, something I may be a bit late to the party on this, but we've just started using a tool called Loom, and it's basically just an extremely easy way to share your screen and have a little video of yourself talking at the same time. I've thought about, I haven't actually done any trials yet, but I've thought about whether this could be used as part of a technical interview process. It's obviously extremely daunting for people, well, for some people, to be talking in person on a video call. Like, it's a new thing for a lot of people, and some people may not be at their best anyway in this kind of situation. Whereas if you do a Loom, you can either have just the screen being recorded, or the screen and the voice, or the screen and the camera. It's as easy as anything to set up, and the second you press stop recording, it takes you to a link of this video. So you may find that there's some kind of iterative thing where people could do a challenge, and you could watch their screen, I don't know, 10 minutes, 15 minutes or something, and then they send that to you, and you can send a Loom back with you saying, this was great, but now try and change it in this way, or work on this bit of text. We found it just exceptionally powerful for a variety of different things. So definitely something that I check out.
Cool. Just to pick up on the thing you said there, Barry, the fact that not everyone is, it is quite daunting talking like this for some people. It's quite a difficult communication mechanism. Arguably, given we might be locked down for some amount of time, if you are currently hiring, maybe you want to be hiring for someone who is already comfortable with this and can model it for the rest of your team. Like, if your organisation as a whole has a gap in like being able to communicate well in non-person terms, then that's probably something you want to work on as a team, and adding someone to the team who's done it before and can do it easily is maybe something you want to consider as part of your hiring activities if you still have roles open right now. Absolutely. Does anyone else have any other questions on remote hiring that they want to throw at the panel?
I've got devil's advocate question, I suppose. If in the short term people aren't going to have to work together physically, we don't know for how long, and maybe the landscape will change and teams will stay remote, is it so important that you hire people you get on with, or do the kind of characteristics change? Do you now go for someone who's maybe better at doing the job but not so easy to get along with? Just to be interested to hear your thoughts on that.
You absolutely double down. You absolutely double down on getting people that you can get along with. It is critical, triply critical with remote, because your communication mechanisms have been shot to shit, right? So the number of fights I see between remote team members is just way more than people in person, right? Because there's no outlet for them, right? There's no let's go down to the cafe, have a coffee, sort this out. There's no let's go down to the pub and have a beer and sort this out. There's none of that human communication stuff which typically goes on, which allows people to back off, apologize, that sort of stuff. And so you get blazing rows. Just look at the Linux mailing list, right? This is a brilliant example of it. So absolutely hire for people who get on first. And I will stand by that statement till the day I die.
I think I think the sort of whether people get on is important. I think the question is what do we mean when we say someone that we get on with as part of the hiring process, right? I think I think the Linux mailing list is a terrible idea, because Linus is an awful toxic person. And I think like maybe what you ought to be doing is not hiring people who are awful and toxic. And if that is if you're benchmarking, do I get on with this person based on their level of toxicity? Maybe that's the wrong sort of angle. But I guess getting on, someone that you get on with, I guess, is someone you can be civil with, who's a good communicator, who's willing to be humble about things, and like those sorts of traits are probably what you want to optimize for. But yeah, I agree that you do have to double down on people who can get on with other people in this environment. Like, if most of your communication is on Slack, you're going to get misunderstood at least 30% of the time, and you need to be able to kind of deal with that and sort of head it off in some useful way.
And it's tricky to test this stuff, but there are a whole bunch of models you can use. So you can research something called the SCARF model. So that's I'll type that into the thing. So SCARF model. So that's something you can research, which is a model of how people interact with each other and some of the trigger points that they may have to get them to not behave at their best. There's also this thing about self-regulation, which will be interesting for people to look at. So I'll get Barry to send out links. I'll send links to Barry and he can distribute it amongst the group later. So there are a bunch of interview questions and things you can ask to see whether people will have adverse or negative reactions to commonplace workplace conversations. So we tend to in our interviews, we tend to poke at people a little bit, sort of force them into situations where they should end up saying, no, I don't know this. We will, deliberately play devil's advocate at times in an interview to see how they respond to critical feedback. And we'll chat to them generally about, how they see their own status in terms of themselves and the team and in the industry and things like that. And when you start asking questions like that, you'll see positive and negative behaviors coming out, and that gives you a bit of an indication. But it is a harder, softer side of interviewing that HR is particularly good at. If you've got good HR people, they can help guide you. But if you don't have that, then you need to go away and do some research.
Yeah, I would follow that up with an absolute agree that you do have to double down. The thing you do have to be careful for, especially I think when you're hiring, is that you don't fall into the bias of hiring people that are exactly like yourself, and that's why you get on with them. We still need to support diversity and inclusivity. So just make sure you're not falling into that trap. And there are ways around this, and there are quite a few good sort of materials on how you can ensure that you have a good hiring pipeline that ensures that you're reaching out not just to your standard recruitment pool, but a wider recruitment pool that has some fantastic people in it. And I think the other thing as well is, in a remote team, mood spreads horrendously fast and it persists for a long time. If you hire someone that is defiant and negative and causes problems and toxicity within a team, it will spread fast and it will bring down the productivity of your whole team so rapidly, and it will take a long time to repair. It is so important that you hire people that are good-natured and get on with people. They don't have to be best mates and hang out after work and Twitch stream their favorite video game for 4 hours and all of these things. But they just have to get on with people while they're at work so that they can do their job in a professional way.
Yeah, I mean, I'll speak to personal experience now. So in my group in Microsoft, we have got I'm overloaded with what we call principal engineers at Microsoft at the moment. So they're at the very top of their field at Microsoft, just about. And it's a massive war going on in my group, right? There's just too many cooks. They're constantly clashing. And that has permeated throughout the entire group. And the entire group is semi-miserable at the moment because they feel that there's just constant infighting going on. In reality, it isn't, right? That only maybe 2% of conversations are coming across that way. But it's enough to permeate throughout the whole group. And we've just had to spend an entire team week together, a virtual team week, talking about our culture and communication. And we're starting to codify it all down, try and get my group back on track. It will now probably take me between 3 and 6 months to do that, after only 2 to 3 weeks of pretty negative behavior. So it is, as James said, it is really, really important. And I'm suffering through it right now. And despite in theory having some experience on how to handle these situations, I'm feeling the pain just as much as any of you.
I think that's probably another point to follow up, is that don't kick yourself if you make a mistake in the hiring or onboarding process. Just learn from it and move on. It's like everything else, we're all human. None of us are perfect. Look for support from people that have done it before. If you're struggling, there's the Meet a Mentor framework, which is really good. If you're looking for help in particular areas, or just generally, in fact, and there are other support networks out there as well. So don't feel like you're alone, and don't kick yourself too hard if you do make a mistake, but just move on and learn from them.
I think I'd throw in one other point on this hiring thing from the other side of the fence. So I don't recruit myself anymore, but obviously spent a lot of time recruiting back in the day. And it's very often that if people are slightly unsure, they tend not to hire people. And we've seen people, because we obviously get to see the people that CTOs don't hire, where they go on to. And so often people turn down great people because of this kind of thing. So it's just one of those things that I would always try to encourage, bringing up your concerns and and if there is an opportunity to run a kind of a trial or use that probation period, that's what it's there for. Rather than seeing a hire as, right, you're most likely going to get through a probation period, it's an opportunity to impress still. And so I would say 9 times out of the 10, where people have said, I'm not sure, and we've encouraged companies to give it a go, the people work out and they become great developers. And it's often just they came across wrong in the interview. They said something slightly wrong, and afterwards we have the call with them and they're all saying, oh, I can't believe I said that, but it's the reason they didn't get the job. And so we see a lot of companies, all the time, turn down great people for ultimately a poor performance in an interview, rather than them actually being the wrong person or the wrong fit. So it's just something to bear in mind. If there's any way that you can add a trial, or at least if you're thinking about, if you interview somebody and you think, we're not sure, go back to them and say, look, we're not sure, we're probably leaning towards no because of these reasons. If you can, if there's a way through it, and just give them a chance to argue their case, give them another chance, have another chat with them on the phone, and make sure, rather than being too quick to say no. That's just one thing that we've seen from that side of the fence.
Yeah, I think I will always give detailed feedback to people who've got pretty much all the way through the hiring pipeline. The kind of early phone screens and stuff will just be a kind of, just we're not interested in carrying on. Maybe a couple of sort of brief pointers, but if someone's committed their time to doing our tech assessment and dialing into a more involved interview and so forth, then I think it is correct and reasonable to expect that you'll give them a decent sort of well thought out bit of feedback. I'll take 30 minutes to an hour or something writing up the sort of things that I think were a miss, and sometimes it becomes a conversation about how that might how we might have misinterpreted that or whatever. But I think it's important to give back in that regard if you're going to take someone's time to bring them all the way through a hiring pipeline and not offer them a job.
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah. Okay, cool. All right, well, guys, I'll bring it to a close then on that. We're just over the 45-minute mark. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Massive thanks to our panel. As I think I can't remember if it was James, I think, was saying, the biggest thing at the moment, we're all in just such unprecedented times. And so Meet a Mentor is out there as an opportunity. We offer free mentoring there. Another community that is phenomenal is the one that this is in partnership which is CTO Craft. Again, by show of hands, we've got many CTO Craft members in. Okay, so you can see, for anyone that's not, you can see it's a popular community. It's run by Andy Skipper, and it's most of it's free, but there's also some structured paid mentoring in there as well. I think we've got Dan Smith on as well. Dan, did you want to say anything about what's coming up with CTO Craft, or how people could get involved?
Yeah, thanks, Barry. Obviously, a lot of you do already know about us, and I can see some familiar faces already spoken to this week. But yeah, basically we offer mentoring, coaching, and there's a community where people share their knowledge. There's a Slack community, so do head over to the website and join up if it's interesting. We've, like everyone else, gone online. We had events planned, so we're moving online. We did some discussion groups this week, smaller groups where you can talk in more depth with peers, curated conversation. We're doing events like this with more people. So what we really need also is to hear from you what it is you want. So we're, like everyone else, heading a bit into the unknown. So what works out most useful for you, whether you might need a program of workshops or particular topics or particular formats. So feel free to get in touch with me or Andy, and I'll give Barry my contact details and Andy, so you can get in touch at any time. So yeah, thanks all for coming as well.
Real. Thanks, guys. There'll be more of these coming up soon, so stay tuned. And exactly as Dan said, if there's anything in particular that you want any of us to do, then yeah, let us know.